Hello. I am going to be putting the veneer on the headstock, and incidentally the veneer is exactly the same width as the headstock blank, the neck blank, which is a complete fluke. It wasn't intended like that, it's just worked out that way. It's exactly the same width. Who'd have thought? But yeah, this is 3mm thick. This is the position we left it in last time, and I was going to just glue that straight on the headstock, end of story, thinking that the extra width would be helpful because this is end grain and it would just help with the strength of it. Although laburnum is a very tough wood, and actually I don't think it needs, I think I was a little bit too concerned about the strength of it. It is actually quite a tough wood. But 3mm, it's a 15 degree angle, and if you cut through that way to put the nut on top of this, if you cut through at 15 degrees with 3mm thick veneer, you end up with a flat spot that is 12mm wide. This is because, hit you with some mathematics here, sine of 15 degrees is roughly a quarter, roughly 0.25. So for 3mm thick, multiply that by 4, you get a 12mm flat spot. And ideally I want the nut, the back of the nut, to be on that little crest, which means I would have had to have had 7mm of veneer underneath the fretboard, if I assume that the nut is 5mm thick, which might be okay, but I don't know, it might not look quite right, maybe. It also means that the nut and the fretboard will have been moved back a full 7mm, which I think I'm okay with. I've still got the extra length in the headstock, but yeah, I've decided that I want that flat spot to be close to the width of the nut. I'm happy to let the end of the veneer go under the fretboard by 1mm or so. That's fine. So I'm going to halve the thickness of this to 1.5mm, so we only have a 6mm flat. So the back of the back of the nut will be on the crest, and then it will stick out from the front of the nut by about 1mm, which will be underneath the fretboard. So that's what we're going for. So before we do anything else, let's go back to the drum sander and get this down to 1.5mm and hope we don't break it. I've now got this down to 1.5mm, and it feels dramatically different, quite flexible. So for end grain I've got to be really careful. There you go, 1.6. So that's fine. We'll finish final sanding, we'll take it down. Now, as you can see, I've marked the headstock out. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to trim it to size. I'm going to leave a couple of lugs on because I'm going to use locating pins. I'll just drill a couple of cocktail sticks into the headstock. But this is going to go on there. To be honest, that doesn't look square to me, but yeah, okay. Might have to draw the centre line on and check that. I think it's the fact I've twisted it, it just makes it perhaps look slightly less square. Don't know. Anyway, before I do that, I am going to just do a final plane, get this all true. I left it because I thought things might move a little bit. It's not moved as such, but you can actually feel where the edges of this maple veneer are. So the maple must have expanded or something under glue, or well, since gluing, because the glue was dry when it got planed. But it's just I'm interested. There's no way I can demonstrate this to you because you can't see it or measure it, but you can feel with your finger there's definitely a ridge along each, very small, very slight, along the edge of each maple veneer edge. So we'll just give this another planing. This end grain may have pulled in a little bit. This is not quite flat here. I'd need to take most of the material away here. I can only plane in this direction because otherwise I'll hit the end grain and it'll tear. Can't of course see that. Maybe just a little bit more. I have to plane the headstock that way. I had to plane that way because of the grain here. I've got to plane that way because of the grain in the purple heart. I will get tear out because the grain is coming up that way. So if I planed this way, the same direction as the rest of the neck, I'd just be eating into the end of the purple heart end grain. I've checked the flatness and I think there's a little bit of a sag there, so I've just got to be careful just to keep the pressure on the front of the plane initially. Yeah, the plane doesn't bite until it gets about here. Yeah, it's using a nicely sharpened plane makes me realise my number 6 was getting a little bit blunt. It's now faced quite nicely, I think. Yeah. Nice and smooth, and I can no longer feel the maple stripes. So that's good. And we're square. Always check squareness at the nut. So all is good. Oh, this is proving really awkward to cut. At least it's breaking off behind the line. I was going to trim this, but maybe I shouldn't. I was hoping to recover some of this veneer because it's the perfect thickness for inlay, but I'm going to end up breaking this veneer. I think I better just glue it as it is. Lots of gentle cuts. Oh, there we go. I'm going to line this up on the centre line. Like so. And flush with the end of the fretboard what will be the nut. Oh, that's tight and nice. temporarily clamp it in place. And I'm happy that that's where I need it. And just so it doesn't move during gluing, I really should have this. I should have something under here supporting this if I'm going to be bearing on it. But and one down here. It should be a bit easier because I'm drilling into walnut. So what I can now do is I can put cocktail sticks in at each end. Let me just chop off the end of the cocktail stick. So we can peg each end, and then that will stop it moving when we glue, which will be right now. I'm going to try and do a thin layer of glue by using a brush, and I'm going to brush it on both surfaces. Yeah, I might need more glue anyway. It's very thick glue. It's very difficult to get thick glue thin. And on the back of the veneer. In fact, I'm coating both surfaces. I'm sure I'm still going to get comments about using too much glue, but I admit I have used too much glue in the past. But then I guess it's possible to use too little. For those people who say I use too much glue, what are the downsides? It's just really a matter of squeeze out. I don't think it affects the quality of the joint. Well, I've never yet been able to see my glue joint, so it's not like I'm using this so much. The veneer's curling already. I've got a little bit of glue on my fingers and I've just wiped it on the surface, which is not good when I'm about to put a cord on top of it. It's amazing how much it is curling actually. So I doubt the edges are going to be stuck particularly well. We're just got to make sure we clamp it properly. No, I have got squeeze out though. Let's get the cord in the right place. At least if the caul, which is of course the template, at least if it's positioned where it should be, then it should be applying pressure over the main area. Yeah, I've got to squeeze out even so. Oh well, I'm going to get the comments about used too much glue. Now, shall I just put more screw clamps on? I think I'm going to use screw clamps. For the middle. The veneer has still managed to curl up at the edges, so I'll keep those down. Make sure it's clamped everywhere. I don't want any. I know I'm going to be trimming it all, but still want it to be glued evenly. Yeah, even the tiny spot of glue. As much as I rubbed it off, it was enough to just tack it on, but we're okay. Well, went really well. It's glued pretty well, but the corner here has lifted very slightly because it wasn't under the caul. I think maybe I would have been better off with a bigger caul, maybe the whole size of the headstock, although obviously I've got to keep the pins clear where I pinned it with cocktail sticks. I don't know. Underneath the caul it should be fine, so we're going to be trimming all this away. It's only had 2 hours of gluing though, so I'm going to leave it now. The next thing to do is just to shave all this back flush to create the little sort of shelf for the nut, and then we'll get it all routed out for the truss rod, and maybe shape the head, thickness it, etc. This is all for future videos, so make sure you're subscribed if you're not already, and we'll see you back for more exciting installations of the guitar that's slowly emerging from all this gorgeous wood. Bye!